This is a bizarre encounter I had one summer evening up at Mount Hood National Forest, Oregon. It was twilight, my favorite time to be out in nature. I've been an avid fly fisher for decades, and there's nothing quite like standing waist deep in a running stream, lost in my own little world. That evening was like any other, with the sky turning purple and red as the sun went down. With every cast of my lure, I felt that calm descending upon me. I could only hear the water and the forest rustling as the day ended. Sitting in my canoe, waiting for a bite, I got lost in the forest sounds. Insects buzzed around, and every now and then an owl hooted. It was so peaceful, almost unreal. As the evening lingered, shadows stretching and dappling on the water, I decided to try a spot further up the stream. Paddling slowly, I thought about which lures to use, smiling to myself. There is something magical about breathing cool evening air, surrounded by lush foliage, while mentally lining up your next cast. Suddenly, I saw something moving on the bank, a dark shape. It looked large, presumably a bear, I figured, but the fleeting vision quickly disappeared back into the thick undergrowth. My eyes scanned the dense forest, straining against the dying light. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was bigger than any bear I've seen. My pulse quickened a notch at the sheer size of the creature, but I brushed it off, choosing to focus on my fishing. You see all sorts of animals when you spend as much time as I do out in the wilderness, but this was different. After a few casts in the crisp twilight air, I heard an odd sound give way from the forest depths, a deep, resonant bellowing unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It reverberated through the stillness of the twilight, a primitive and raw sound that was enough to send chills down my spine. It was unexpected, unidentifiable, and sounded close. My fishing rod slipped from my hand, forgotten, as I strained to see into the depths of the forest, the dimming twilight adding to my foreboding. All thoughts of fishing, peace, and solitude disappearing as I wondered what kind of forest creature might have made that terrifying sound. I was preparing to call it a night, the mystery and unease from the forest deciding it for me, when I heard a shuffling closer to the bank. Leaves rustled and branches snapped, indisputable evidence of something massive moving. My heart pounded in my chest, my gut instinct warning me that whatever I was about to encounter was not part of my regular fishing trips. Just like that, the calm of the evening was gone, and all I felt was this intense mix of anticipation and fear. I have never experienced anything quite like this. It felt like I was in a horror movie. It was dark, and there was this strange creature. I felt an eerie uneasiness, the kind that makes your hairs stand up. I remember what happened next so clearly. It's almost strange. I squinted, trying to make out the figure that had suddenly appeared amongst the thick foliage, standing tall and immobile across the river. I held my breath, a mix of curiosity and anxiety gnawing at me. All thoughts of retreat evaporated. I wasn't about to back out now. I could feel it was something extraordinary. Then, as it got darker, I saw it move. The figure was colossal, standing well above 8 feet tall. Its hulky and massive form blinked in and out of my sight amongst the trees. I blinked, trying to clear any mirage. It wasn't a bear. No bear could stand that tall and hold still for so long. It looked like a really big person, walking with a wide chest. The creature was tan, light brown, a color that blended exceptionally well with the forest surrounding it. Slowly striding forward at the water's edge, it was dragging an arm casually, taking its time. It looked relaxed, calm even, which in a strange way quieted my pounding heart. From where I was sitting, I could make out notable details. It had a prominent jaw, laid under a broad forehead, descending into a sloping skull. The jaw stuck out, looking strong. Its deep eyes were looking at the ground. It was just like the stories. A Sasquatch, maybe. I couldn't help but gasp quietly, realizing what I was seeing. I was observing in the flesh a creature of legends, folklore, and dubious eyewitness accounts. Yet, here it was, Sasquatch. I was on edge, feeling the wildness of it. Also, a strong smell came across the river, almost making me gag. It was rancid, dank, and powerful, a scent that spoke of unchecked wilderness. of places untamed by mankind. The figure paused at the water's edge. It growled and then whooped, the sound echoing across the river. The sounds eerily familiar to me now. Its face seemed to turn in my direction, as if sensing my presence. I sat stock still, my heart pounding. It grunted, a bellowing deep bass that resonated across the river to where I sat, wide-eyed and awestruck. Drawing a distinctly ragged breath, the colossal figure ambled on, breaking the river's stillness for a drink. Then, with what looked like a disinterested glance over its massive shoulder, it quickly blended back into the forest, leaving nothing more than slightly disturbed water and an overpowering silence in its wake. On my way back home, thinking about it over and over, I felt this new sense of wonder. All those stories, weird footprints, and shaky videos. After years of skepticism and disbelief, I was now a believer. Days later, I still think about it, what I saw, smelled, and heard. I have yet to return to that spot, a part of me eager to, hoping for another encounter, another chance to observe the elusive Sasquatch in its habitat. A couple of years back, I had this strange encounter right in my own backyard in Sedona, Arizona. If you've never been to Sedona, let me tell you, it's quite the place. People around there believe in these energy vortexes, saying they've got some kind of mystical powers. Plus, the place is just stunning at night, with a clear view of the stars sprawling above. So there I was in the summer of 2019, just kicking back by myself one night. I've always found a deep calm staring up at the stars, kind of like they have a way of making all your troubles seem tiny. I had this habit of chilling outside, taking in the quiet of the night. That night was no different. I was lounging on my rickety old lawn chair, feeling the cool desert breeze and listening to nothing but silence. It was my own little slice of heaven to clear my head. I had been lying there for a while watching the stars when something weird happened. I know how it sounds, but I felt this vibration in the air, like everything had a low electric charge, but something I just couldn't put my finger on. The air felt charged, different somehow. Then, as I was looking at the stars near the Pleiades cluster, they started to disappear, just blinked out, like someone was turning off lights in the sky. This big patch of darkness grew, like a shadow spreading across the sky and covering the stars. Everything went quiet, even the little sounds of the night that you don't notice until they're gone. I was there, holding my breath, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks on me. My heart was racing, caught between being scared and excited. I kept thinking, this can't be real. But then, right out of the dark patch, this figure showed up. It looked like a person, but all wrong, like its shape kept changing. It glowed faintly, making the whole backyard look otherworldly. I felt this weird pressure in my head, and for a second, everything around me seemed to warp and twist. I'll tell you, it was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. You might think I was dreaming, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But what happened next was something I could never have imagined. I started hearing whispers in my head, soft and faint at first. They got louder, clearer, until I could tell it was a voice, a real voice. But it wasn't coming through my ears. It was inside my head, a part of me but also something else. This voice, it talked about journeying across the universe, seeing worlds and life that we can't even begin to understand. Right there, in my backyard under the stars, I felt something with me. It wasn't scary or threatening, but peaceful, almost like it was asking me to just be there with it. It didn't look human. It had these big black eyes that seemed to hold the entire night sky within them. It was like it wasn't really there, not like you and me, but I could feel it, as sure as the ground beneath my feet. We somehow shared thoughts and feelings without speaking. It's hard to describe, like we were connecting in a way I've never connected with another person. It was silent but very clear all at the same time. It also felt like forever, but it could have been just a few moments. Then, just as quickly as the encounter started, it was over. The light went away. The darkness in the sky pulled back, and the stars were just regular old stars again. The night sounds came back, And that thing, that being with all its mystery and knowledge, was gone. I sat there for the longest time, trying to make sense of it all. That connection I felt was deeper than anything else I've ever known. And let me tell you that it really changed me. Changed because now I was fully aware of how deeply you can connect to another being. The experience made me see things differently, feel differently about our world, other humans, and my place in it. Now, whenever I look up at the stars, I can't help but wonder if someone out there is looking back, and maybe even looking back at me. It might sound out there, but this experience, it's a part of me now. I don't have proof, and maybe that's okay. It was a gift, really, to feel something so incredible, and so beyond anything I could think would ever happen. This happened to me about 3 years back. It's early summer, about 5 a.m., just off the coast of Portland, Maine. It was a beautiful day. The sea was smooth as glass, and the air was salty, just peaceful. Been lobster fishing there for the better part of 20 years, and I tell you, you can't beat a Maine sunrise. That particular morning was gearing up to be another good day at the office. I started my day like always, up before the birds, with the sky clinging to the last bit of night. Had my usual coffee to start the day. I need my caffeine before I can really enjoy that calm sea. I then prepared the Betty Jean, my old but faithful lobster boat, for another day's reward. Hauling traps isn't for everyone, but for me, it beats city life any day. Once Betty Jean was stocked and ready, I shoved off as the first light reflected off the still waters. There's something about being alone out there on the sea. It's hard to explain. As I headed for my traps, I took a deep breath and let the salty air fill my lungs. The smell was stronger that morning. Unusual? Maybe, but I wasn't worried. The sea has a mind of her own. After setting a few traps, I decided to take a little break, stand by the edge of the Betty Jean, watch the ocean, and just slow the world down a bit. But that's when things started getting weird. Suddenly, this weird low rumble broke the quiet. It was somewhere between a roar and a bellow. I felt it through the boat, kind of like standing next to speakers at a concert. A ripple cut across the calm water and I steadied myself. Usually it's when I haul up a trap that's far heavier than it should be. But something about the day was starting to feel wrong. The air got heavier, like something was about to happen. Subtle changes in the environment, the kind you can only notice when you've spent a lifetime at sea. The water started getting choppy, waves rolled up, and a huge shadow darkened the water below me. Something was out there, something massive and hidden just below the surface. It wasn't fast like a shark. This thing was slow, deliberate, and seemingly undeterred by my presence. Betty Jean swayed with the waves, and I could taste fear mixing with the salt in the air. I was both intrigued and scared. I don't know if it was curiosity or just being dumb, but I couldn't move. My heart was racing. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if it was just lack of sleep or last night's drinks playing tricks. But everything was real. The shadow beneath the water, the cold fear running through my veins. It was all too real. In all my years on the water, I've seen things you wouldn't believe. I've seen blue sharks common as mosquitoes in a swamp, hundreds of dolphins turning the surface of the waves into a playground, and even a wayward orca who forgot to head back north in time. But this was different. Whatever was under my boat was huge. Couldn't tell if it was dangerous or not. The whole event was so surreal, like something out of a movie. Felt like I was in a movie or something. What was this thing? Some sea monster from old stories? Or was I just seeing things? The water had gone still again. No more rumbling, but that shadow was still there, lurking and giving me the chills. So, the silence was broken yet again, this time by the sharp calls of seagulls, piercing and panicked. They were squabbling and squawking, tumbling over each other as they flew off the island to the east. The sudden burst of avian madness had me glancing over, but my stomach dropped as I saw the cause of their turmoil. The ocean beneath them churned, not from the usual cause of hunting fish. This was something incomparably larger. I turned my gaze back to the monstrous shadow cast beneath the Betty Jean. Suddenly, the ocean erupted. Water, seaweed, and brine burst into the air, and something monstrous emerged. Saw these huge tentacles, lots of them, thick and covered in dark scales. They were illuminated by a soft, almost eerie glow under the morning sun. The tentacles slammed back into the ocean, splashing water everywhere. It shook the Betty Jean like a toy boat in a bathtub. I was frozen in fear on the deck, hearing this deep, eerie bellow from under the waves. Then silence, a deafening quiet as even the panicked seagulls had fled. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like an eternity, but might have only been a few seconds. The creature, and I don't know what else to call it, simply retracted its tentacles and disappeared back into the ocean as suddenly as it had arrived. I stood there in silence, heart hammering in my chest. The Betty Jean swayed gently now on the serene waters. Everything went calm again, like nothing happened. But it didn't feel normal to me anymore. The ocean had changed for me, irrevocably. Every shadow, ripple, or unexplainable sound had me second-guessing my sanity and safety. The creature had disappeared, yet the sense of dread remained, lingering like a bad smell. The rest of the day passed in a blur. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Was this just a strange, twisted dream? I took solace in the fact that confronting the unknown hadn't completely daunted me. There was some comfort in the familiar, the taste of salty air, the gulls' squawks returning to background noise, the constant lapping of the water against the Betty Jean. The sea was back to normal, kind of mocking my own struggle to wrap my head around what happened. The lobster traps remained heavy, but the day had lost its charm. The creature had disappeared, yet its ghostly presence continued to haunt my every moment. Following days found me casting nervous glances into the clear waters, half expecting another behemoth visit. The mystery remained, as deep and fathomless as the ocean itself. For now, I keep on, because as disturbed as I am from the encounter, the sea is my life. Now every morning when I head out, I catch myself saying a little prayer, hoping that whatever's down there stays hidden. A few years back, when the stress of daily life became too much, I found solace in meditation. It usually did the trick, but there's this one experience that still unsettles me. It happened during a trip I took alone to Bryce Canyon in Utah, around the end of August. I was staying in Vegas at that time, and the drive to Bryce Canyon was about 4 hours, just me and my trusty old pickup, with my meditation mat in the back. I'd heard that being in nature could enhance meditation, and the remote beauty of Bryce Canyon seemed like the perfect spot. The thought of meditating as the sun set in such a stunning location was too good to pass up. The peacefulness and solitude, combined with the canyon's natural beauty, seemed like an ideal setting. The day I went, the weather was perfect, sunny with a gentle, cool breeze. I packed a light picnic, set off in my pickup, and soon I was driving through the expansive landscape. It felt like a personal journey of discovery. When I arrived at Bryce Canyon, the sight was even more incredible than I imagined. The sun was turning the canyon into a mix of orange, pink, red, and purple hues. I found a quiet spot, laid out my mat, and sat down. It was silent, save for the occasional whisper of wind through the leaves. As I started to meditate, focusing on my breath, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the canyon walls. But then, I heard something, a subtle rustling in the bushes. At first, I didn't notice as I was deep into my meditation, but after repeatedly hearing it, I started to become aware. I assumed it was a harmless animal, maybe a deer, but the rustling sounds kept changing, unsettling me. One minute they were heavy, suggesting something large. The next, they were light and quick. Feeling a bit anxious, I decided to investigate, hoping to scare off whatever was out there. I wasn't expecting any dangerous wildlife since the area wasn't that wild. But I was mistaken, to say the least. Peering into the fading light, a shiver ran down my spine, and my instincts told me something was off. That's when my peaceful evening at Bryce Canyon turned into something out of a horror story. Although at that moment I didn't fully understand what I was dealing with. In the bushes, there were eyes that didn't seem to belong to any regular animal. It was something different. And just as this realization hit me, the air turned cold, as if winter had arrived in an instant. More than the chill, it was the abrupt change that shocked me. The rustling noise kept up, but it was the unmistakable feeling of being watched that really got to me. Many know that sensation, the one that makes the hairs on your neck stand up without any apparent reason. I couldn't ignore this deep sense of being observed. Drawn to the shadows, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a shadowy form materialized. It was a large, stooped figure that seemed almost human, yet grotesquely misshapen. Its presence was deeply unsettling. What really unnerved me were its eyes, dull red orbs that fixed on me with an intense stare. I was rooted to the spot, an icy fear gripping me unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This creature moved with a disconcerting fluidity that blurred the line between man and beast. It would drop to all fours, then rise to survey its surroundings, an unnatural predator in the fading light. Tales of skinwalkers from my childhood came flooding back, though I'd never truly believed in them, until now. The tranquility I had felt during meditation was shattered by a surge of panic. All aspirations of calm were forgotten as dread took their place. I was on my feet in an instant, my eyes fixed on the shadow that lurked just beyond the light. Instinct took over, the primal urge to flee drowning out any lingering curiosity. Without fully processing my actions, I was moving, sprinting to my pickup. I started the engine and drove away as fast as I could, leaving the silent beauty of Bryce Canyon behind. I had sought a serene retreat in nature, not an encounter with a thing of nightmares. The event left me reeling, forcing me to reconsider what's real and what's merely myth. Could the two intersect? I'm still not sure. That unsettling day at Bryce Canyon has raised more questions than it has given answers. I've not returned to the canyon, nor have I resumed my meditation practices. The call of the wild now carries a note of caution, its charm tinged with wariness. I still hope to muster the courage to return someday, but for now, I stay away. Let me tell you about this one time about 3 years back, right smack in the middle of Georgia. I'm talking about our infamous swampland, a place that's got a reputation for being pretty spooky once the sun goes down. So picture me there, right? I'm in the thick of that swamp with all its weird and wild sounds. You've got crickets playing their tunes, gators belting out their strange croaks, and all sorts of critters making noise. It was just another day at first. Me floating in a boat down the waterways, watching birds, snapping pictures, and spotting gators left and right. Come evening, I pitched my little tent, whipped up some food over the fire, and got ready to crash out under a sky full of stars. The swamp was singing its eerie lullaby, but you know what was odd? The quiet. It was too quiet, like the swamp was holding back. Yeah, there were noises, but somehow, they didn't sound like they normally did. Back in the city where I live, I'm used to lots of noise cars, lights buzzing all night long. But out here, it's a whole different ballgame, and you need to know what you're hearing to stay safe. When night falls in the swamp, it's so pitch black you might as well be blind without a light. Just sitting by my campfire, I could hear the pop and hiss of the flames, and every so often, a turtle would make a little splash. I was just about to let sleep take me when something cut through the peace like a hot knife through butter. A growl, mean and cold, sent shivers dancing up my spine. Was it a bark? A howl? I couldn't tell, but it sure wasn't any noise I'd heard before. It rolled across the swamp, scaring the bejesus out of me. That's when it hit me. I wasn't alone out there, and it's not another human that I'm hearing. I tried to shake it off, telling myself, it's just some swamp critter, but I could feel it in my bones that something wasn't right. I was kidding myself if I thought everything was okay. And then, I saw something I'll never forget. There, by the fire, was this shadow that just didn't belong. I'm talking about a beast nearly 6 feet tall, hunched over and looming like a nightmare. The fire flickered just enough for me to see its matted fur, and the air, it was thick with this heavy sulfur smell. This thing was huge, all muscle, and looked like someone's bad idea of a joke on a dog. Its eyes? They were like red-hot coals, burning right through the darkness. The growl of this thing, it was like thunder on a clear day, scary, deep, and warning, like nature telling you to run for cover. It was one of those sounds that gets right under your skin, makes your heart do somersaults, and puts your nerves on edge. Part of me was trying to be logical, trying really hard to convince myself it's just a normal animal, maybe one that's sick, having a tough time out there. But deep down, I knew better. The fear I felt was primitive, screaming inside me that this creature was something different, something that didn't belong. I should have bolted, should have made a run for it, but my feet might as well have been stuck in swamp mud. I was fixated on this creature, torn between terror and this mad itch to figure out what I was looking at. It snapped its jaws, and I'm telling you, those teeth were like knives, shining in the dim light. Then it let out another howl, the kind that makes you think the earth itself is breaking apart. And just like that, it was gone, poof, like smoke, leaving nothing but a stink of sulfur and a memory that would haunt my dreams. Looking around, everything was just as I left it. My campsite was calm. The mud still had my boot prints. The tent was where I pitched it. It was like nothing had happened, like the night had stayed peaceful. For a second, I thought maybe I dreamed the whole thing up, but that sulfur smell was too strong, too nasty to be part of a dream. And those eyes, they were too real, too frightening. I packed up at first light and headed back to where people lived, back to where the world made sense. I shared my story with a few buddies, but got the expected chuckles and shakes of the head. It was just a tall tale to them, something stirred up by the swamp's quiet. But I saw something else in their looks, a little spark that maybe, just maybe, they wanted to believe it. I've done my homework since that night. What I saw, it's got a name, a hellhound. That's enough to send a shiver up anyone's spine. I still camp, but it's never solo. I stick with friends and I make sure we're all tucked away in a car long before the sun dips. And as for being alone out there, I learned my lesson. Even when you think you're by yourself in the wild, you're not. There's stuff out there in the dark, stuff beyond what we know. Let me tell you about this one time. I'll never shake it from my memory. It was during a sunrise jog down Santa Monica Beach. You know, there's something special about the quiet of the early morning, how it slowly wakes up and stretches into the hustle and bustle of the day. This happened a while back, around the tail end of 2014. I was living out in California then. I didn't run because I was some kind of fitness freak or health nut. Nah, it was more about clearing the cobwebs from my head, you know? Even though it was a bit of a trot from where I lived to the beach, making that round trip was a solid part of my morning ritual. I'd often get to the beach just as the world was about to wake up, with the sand still cool and the ocean whispering to the shore in the dark. I'd stand there for a sec, take a deep breath of that salty sea air, and just watch as the horizon began to glow with the promise of a new day. This morning was no different. Well, it actually started off even better than usual. I followed the path I knew by heart, from my place, passing through neighborhoods that were still lost in dreams, all the way down to the shores of Santa Monica. The sea was this deep, dark blue, darker even than the sky above, fading into this beautiful mix of colors as your eyes moved up to where the sky was starting to catch fire with the morning light. I hit my stride in time with the ocean's own rhythm, my feet keeping beat with the waves that came in wearing foamy white caps, breaking against the wet sand. The sky was putting on a show, all oranges and reds dancing with the blues, just as I got close to the pier. Then, out of nowhere, everything went quiet. I mean, the kind of quiet that's almost loud, you know? That's when I felt it, a prickling on the back of my neck like something was off. So I'm there, thinking the world's gone on mute or something, and that's when I see it. Up in the sky, there was something that looked like a plane at first glance, but it was moving all wrong. It was silent, totally silent, and shaped like a perfect sphere. shining like it wasn't from this world at all, catching the sun's early rays in a way that didn't seem natural. This thing, it made a turn that would have had any normal plane falling out of the sky, a sharp, precise slice through the air, and it didn't leave so much as a whisper of itself behind. No contrails, nothing. My heart was racing, and I wasn't even moving anymore, just standing there with this wild sight that had completely upended my usual peaceful morning. And there I was, just rooted to the spot in the quiet of Santa Monica Beach, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It hovered there, not looking like it meant any harm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to, like I'd stumbled onto a secret that was meant to be kept from our eyes. I was stuck there, feet in the sand, eyes locked on this strange visitor that had cut across the morning sky. So there I was, eyes glued to the sky, and this thing, it's getting closer and closer to where I'm standing, and right before my eyes, it starts changing, morphing right there in the open air. It takes on this long cigar-like shape and gets huge, really huge. The weird thing, though, was the silence. It was like the whole world had gone mute, an unnatural kind of quiet that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The thing had a shine to it, like the belly of a plane when it catches the sun. But this was different. It wasn't just bouncing the light off. It was splitting it, scattering it in all directions, like some kind of floating prism, throwing colors all around like it owned the place. I mean, you couldn't peel your eyes off it if you tried. It glided through the air, so smooth and so fast, and without a sound. No jet trails in the sky, no rumble of engines, just the gentle sound of the waves kissing the beach. And then, I swear, for a second, it felt like it knew I was there. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But it stopped all its zipping around and just hovered there, in the air right across from me. I'm looking up at this thing, trying to make head or tail of it, feeling like I've dropped right into the middle of a sci-fi movie. Then, as quick as a flash, it zips off, shooting away into the distance faster than anything I've ever seen. It's gone, and everything comes rushing back. The sound of the waves, the distant noise of the city waking up. It's like I've just woken up from some wild dream, except I'm still standing there on the beach, my morning jog long forgotten. Those morning runs were never the same. I'd catch myself, time and again, scanning the sky, hoping to catch a glimpse of that strange, impossible shape hanging between heaven and earth. I talked to a few buddies about what I saw, and you can guess how that went. Some gave me that look, like they were ready to call the white coats. Others just wanted to see it for themselves. For a moment, it was like I had touched the edge of something massive, something that made you rethink everything. It was a UFO, had to be. It made me see things different, you know? I still hit the beach every morning, and when I'm near that spot by the pier, I can't help but get that buzz, that little kick of excitement. Everything's been normal since then, no more breaks in reality. But if that thing ever decides to come back, I'll be there, ready to just soak it all in, full of wonder. It was about 3 years ago, on a crisp summer night at Craters of the Moon National Monument in Idaho. It's a spot I've always loved. It's so secluded, so quiet. You're out there in the remote wilderness, and you can really be alone with your thoughts. Perfect for a night of stargazing. Something about the isolation really brings the night sky to life. But out there, under the vast expanse of the Milky Way, the night comes alive in a way no city could match. I drove up with my telescope stuffed in the back of my old pickup truck. It was one of those clear, cold nights where the air actually felt thinner, like you could reach up and pluck a star right out of the sky. I parked at the base of a large hill. Its silhouette stood out against the midnight blue of the night sky, dotted with just millions upon millions of stars. I was working on setting up my gear in the bed of my truck, while listening to the soft rustling of the wind through the brush and the distant howls of coyotes. There was a hazy cloud of dust blowing across the horizon. There I was, sifting through my gear and setup manuals, when I heard it. A sound cut through the chill night air. It wasn't loud or abrupt, but it was odd. It was a low growl like something you'd hear on one of those nature shows. Deep and guttural, primal you might say. It sent a chill up my spine, and I noticed that the night around me had become eerily silent, a silence that felt heavy, pressing against me with an unnerving stillness. Suddenly, I felt watched, as though eyes were tracing my every move. Panic gripped me, and I felt my muscles tense while my palms began to sweat. Even then, I assured myself it must be a cougar or a badger, something I would at least recognize. But the feeling persisted. I remember thinking how puny, how inconsequential I was in this vast wilderness, completely isolated. A group of owls then decided to hoot simultaneously in the trees, further off. Their hooting provided a strange backdrop to the silence that had settled. The wind picked up, whirling around and causing the dry desert grass to rustle softly. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that it was just the unfamiliar sounds of the wild messing with my head. But then, something big rustled in the bushes not too far off. A brief flash of yellow, catching the reflection of my headlamp, quickly disappeared in the bush. I squinted hard into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. I don't know why, but something in me knew. I knew that it wasn't a regular animal. Its movements hinted at an unsettling intelligence, a calculated presence that felt almost sinister. It wasn't right, and this feeling went down my spine and raised the hair on the back of my neck. It felt like a drawn-out moment of dread, the kind where danger lurks in the shadows. As I strained my eyes in the moonlit darkness, I noticed among the jagged black of the lava flows an abnormal outline, taller than any desert shrub had a right to be. My heart skipped a beat or two. It was unnaturally tall and slim, very stark and unnatural. The moonlight reflected off its surface, almost reflective. As my heart pounded, I squinted against the darkness, willing my brain to make sense of the shape. There, against the granite black outline of the lava flows, standing still as a statue, I could completely see this being. It was slender, looking to stand about 6 feet, maybe taller. It was hard to tell from where I was. It was draped in shadows, yet its form was oddly distinct against the stars. My shock gradually gave way to a cold, creeping fascination. This was no ordinary desert creature. I was torn between my opposing instincts to either pack up and leave, or stay and observe. It was otherworldly, and the longer I looked, the clearer it became that I wasn't staring at a human. Not even close. I began to notice just how off this thing was. It had a slender torso, with arms ending in what looked like large black claws, just hanging there, motionless. Its head was unfathomable, a chilling echo of some prehistoric beast, complete with a sharp, pronounced snout and evil, piercing eyes. It was as though a prehistoric creature had been plopped right here in the present. My gear lay forgotten as I stared. The wind howled in my ears as somewhere in the distance, a coyote cried out. The figure remained motionless. It was at least an hour before I finally packed up my gear hurriedly, throwing fearful glances over my shoulder. I expected that dreadful figure to charge at me from the dark or disappear altogether, but it did neither. Once safely in my truck, I risked a final glance. It still stood there, a silhouette against the lightening sky, standing tall and still, undeniably real yet horribly unreal at the same time. Fastening my seatbelt, I drove away fast, never looking back. The memory has haunted me, gnawing away at the fringes of my sanity. What could that creature have been? The moonlit desert seemed to have unveiled something ancient, a relic from a bygone era. I returned to Craters of the Moon again, years later and during the day, but it was as ordinary as you would normally expect. I sometimes lean back, gaze up at the sky from my backyard, and wonder if it's still out there amongst the lava. Maybe I'll never know. You know, it's kind of funny what gets you excited, that feeling of stepping into something new and unknown. For me, it's all about digging into the past, that thrill of poking around in old, forgotten places, like that huge empty Packard plant in Detroit, Michigan. You might think I'm a bit odd. I've always stood out a bit from the crowd. So there I was a few days after Halloween in Detroit for work. But I just couldn't ignore the pull of that old rundown factory. The Packard plant, once a big deal in the car world, was now just an empty shell. It was like it was challenging me, showing off the whole life cycle of big industries. They start, they grow, and eventually, they die and crumble. I had my stuff with me, a flashlight, my camera, and one of those masks to keep out the bad air. You never know what's still hanging around in these old places. With a mix of nosiness and a bit of silly courage, I walked up to the old giant as the day was ending. Pigeons were flitting around, owning the place that used to be full of machine noise and busy people. It was so quiet inside, except for the sound of rainwater dripping through holes in the roof. Now and then, a breeze would blow through the smashed windows, carrying with it the echoes of what this place used to be. The upper floors were dim, barely holding on to the evening light, while the lower levels were just swallowed up in darkness, like the daylight was too scared to go down there. The size of the place, with the shadows and light playing tricks, it turned the normal into something strange and eerie. Steel beams reached up like bare bones, and the ground was covered in broken glass that crunched under my boots. My footsteps echoed around the empty factory, making it feel like it was full of ghosts. The air was thick with the smell of damp, old oil and rust. It was like you could taste the years with every breath. And just when you think it's all about the emptiness, that's when the place surprises you. The walls were covered in graffiti, like wild tattoos on the building's wrecked skin, showing that people always want to leave their mark. The old machines were just lying there, rusted and silent, like they were asleep in a tomb made of concrete and peeling paint. I kept moving as the evening light gave way to night. There's something about pushing deeper into the dark, where the light can't reach and time seems to stretch out, that really gets to you. It feels heavy. Every little sense is turned up to 11. It's like the uncertainty of it all is alive, buzzing through you. That's what's so cool about exploring old ruins. It's the scare, the rush, the feeling of touching the untouched, and the prize feeling like you're the first person to set foot in there. As I went deeper, the light from my flashlight started playing tricks, bouncing off the huge, rusting machines. Then I heard something, a weird, soft tapping sound, coming from way over in the far corner. It was like a beat, kind of like when a woodpecker goes to town on a tree or a bat in a cave. Super weird. My heart was thumping hard. I shook it off and kept going, my light struggling against the thick dark. The noise got louder, weirder, and it sent chills down my spine. And then it just cut off, leaving a silence so thick you felt you could touch it. You know, like when quiet is so intense it's almost a thing. That's when all those ghost stories I never paid mind to started creeping into my head, making me wonder if coming here was such a hot idea after all. But before I could make up my mind, the darkness changed, like it moved or something. And I had this chill, like someone or something was watching me. It wasn't just a hunch either. I could see bits of movement, shadows that didn't belong, all just out of clear sight. My heart was racing. I yelled out, but my voice just bounced around that huge space and didn't find anybody. Then it showed up. It was like the air changed when it arrived, getting heavier, sucking in the light. My flashlight's beam caught something creepy crawling on the ground way off in the shadows, fast and quiet, like a shadow that's come to life. It had skin like a pale, sickly fish, all wrong in this dusty, rusty place. When I saw its face, if you could call it that, it was just gaping dark holes for eyes and a mouth. No nose, no ears, just nothing. The clicking came again, louder, like it was coming for me. I was stuck in place, scared stiff. This thing was terrifying, not just how it looked, but the fear it carried with it. I didn't even decide to run. My legs just went for it. I ran like mad, past the old broken machines and the ghosts of the factory's busy days. The clicking got quieter behind me as I pushed through the dark, desperate for the light outside. When I finally got out, the night air hit me like a wave, and I was gasping for breath like I'd been underwater. My heart wouldn't slow down, and I could still feel those empty eyes on me, like I'd just escaped from something hunting me. Driving back to the hotel, the whole thing kept playing over and over in my head. I couldn't shake the fear or the image of that thing. That plant, with its big empty halls, was home to something now. Something that might never have been human. The Packard plant's got a new story to tell now. One with shadows hiding something dark and strange. It's got this creature, right out of a nightmare, living where all the work used to happen. I've heard all sorts of spooky stories since then, about spirits hanging around old, forgotten spots, becoming part of the place like the bricks and the beams. But nothing stuck with me like the horror and the pull of that thing in the Packard plant. That's the deal with exploring old ruins. They're never really empty. There's a terrible beauty in them. They're telling stories all the time. Stories about what was and what's still there. Stories that feel too real, too close. Stories that should probably stay secret. This happened around a couple of years ago when I was living in San Francisco. As a bit of a night owl and a freelance coder, I kept my own hours, which often found me working long hours in the middle of the night. Anyway, this one time, the city was caught in this remarkably thick fog. Imagine a Sherlock Holmes-style London fog, the kind straight out of a mystery novel. It was late November. It had been a long day, work-wise, my eyes aching from staring at the screen for hours. I needed a break and decided on a midnight stroll. An odd hour for a walk, I know, but the city takes on a different hue at night. However, that night, with the fog that dense, you could barely see beyond a dozen feet in front of you. There was a certain serenity to it, a quiet you do not usually associate with San Francisco. Walking the Golden Gate Bridge at such an ungodly hour, alone as I was, can be quite an unsettling experience. And that night, it was eerily quiet. The fog, it swallowed the sounds. Cars were sparse and the ones that were there passed within seconds. I recall, I was around mid-span of the bridge when I noticed a shifty, foggy form in the distance. Thought it was another lonely soul out on a walk. Then again, with the weather being as dreadful as it was, I wondered who else would be crazy to out at this hour. Yet, for someone with an adventure-starved existence like a coder, this felt like venturing into Indiana Jones territory. So, I kept my stroll, eyes curiously trying to catch a hold of the inky form moving within the dense whiteness. It was odd. It seemed like one moment. The shape was small, sort of hunched over, and then the next, it was strangely elongated, towering, like a mischievous imp one moment, then a haunting demon the next. A rush of adrenaline, fueled by intrigue and tinged with a dash of terror, began to flood through me. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts and bring reality back, until a dull growl echoed, a low rumbling sound that amplified in the silent fog and resonated a discomfort deep within me. Something wasn't right. It was more than just another person. It was something ominous, something not normal at all. Yet my eagerness to understand outweighed the growing sense of unease. As I got closer to the figure, the air became heavier, and a sour smell curled into my nostrils, a sort of mix between burnt flesh and sulfur. I gagged, but gripped the walkway rail tighter, inching closer to the silhouette that was still shifting, playing tricks on my senses. It was only a few feet away when its form became clearer to me. It resembled a creature that was fluid in its form, sometimes short and stocky, other times towering and intimidating. It seemed to thrash and convulse within the fog, twisting and contorting to shapes my mind couldn't comprehend. Its eyes, though, were the constant in this entire encounter, as fluctuating as the creature was. They glowed with a dull red color, like a horrible raging fire. They held a menacing glow and glared at me, not from a height or low on the ground, but from all directions, like I was being watched by a dozen demons at once. The fog swirled menacingly around the creature, now resembling a hydra-headed demon. Its growl intensified, bone-chilling, like an ensemble of horrendous, pain-filled cries. Fear exploded within me, my heartbeat thundering against my ribcage. But I couldn't run. My feet were anchored to the spot as though held by invisible shackles. Suddenly, the creature lunged forward, swirling faster. The horrid smell became suffocating, its eyes flaring brighter. In that moment, I thought it was the end. But in a heartbeat, the horrible figure vanished, dissolving into the fog like a nightmarish apparition. The growl subsided, and those haunting eyes blinked out of existence. My heart continued to race, but with prevailing silence, I found my courage to stagger back the way I had come. But I dared not look backwards, fearful that the demon might reemerge. I stumbled, but also dashed as fast as I could all the way back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night or any other night for a long while. I found myself questioning my sanity, the reliability of my senses, and the wisdom of my bravado. The foggy bridge under the moonlit sky didn't appear serene to me anymore. It wasn't a refuge for me anymore. It was now the scene of my horrifying encounter. The growl still echoes in my ears, and the phantom smell lingers on to this day. And the eyes, those menacing, glowing red eyes, I still feel them on me, especially in the darkest, foggiest nights. That's my encounter. A coder's haunting experience with something more terrifying than anything I thought would ever happen to me. From a regular lover of night walks, I became fearful of the night and a reclusive hermit. And I'm now also a skeptic transformed into a believer, not by choice, but through an encounter with the inexplicable. The Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast, an enchanting yet hauntingly infamous place, renowned for its dark history. So I thought, why not? See, I've always been a skeptic about the whole ghost thing, but there's just something about that house in Fall River, Massachusetts. The old dark wood, the chilling atmosphere, and the whispers of untold stories lingering in the air. So, me, the skeptic that I am, decided to book a night there. While not a complete non-believer, I have a soft spot for history, especially when it has an eerie tinge. Call it curiosity, call it fascination, whatever it is. The tale of Lizzie Borden had it all. My stay began like it usually does in any lodging. Classic pleasantries, introduction to staff, and a brief tour of the premises. Although this one was accompanied by a detailed narrative of the chilling history of the house and its infamous former resident. Talk about setting the mood. The B&B does a fine job of preserving the authenticity of its time. With its Victorian-era furnishings, antiquated wallpaper, and the slightly cold, musty scent of aged wood, the place felt like a step back into the 19th century. Like a scene straight out of an old sepia photograph, only I was in it. While the macabre tales echoing in the hallways could curdle the blood, they also tantalized those of us seeking a thrill. And I, in my matchless curiosity, decided to exploit that thrill to the fullest. After dinner, rich with stories of unsolved mysteries, I set off to plunge into the depths of the experience for which I had willingly signed up. Led by a guide well-versed in the intricacies of the Borden saga, I, along with a couple of other brave souls, were subjected to a tour of the house. Each room we visited marked a significant chapter in the house's tragic narrative. The sitting room where the stepmother Abby was found dead, the guest room which was the site of Mr. Borden's demise, and of course the room belonging to Lizzie herself. After the intriguing, if not a bit chilling tour, I headed off to my room for the night. The John V. Morse room, the same room where Abby Borden was found lifeless, had an air of unease hanging about. Hearing about a room's morbid history is one thing. Spending a night in it is entirely another. Yet, I was more curious than afraid. Once tucked in, every sense heightened, attuned to the unnatural silence of the room, where the occasional creaks of wood felt eerily amplified in the dead quiet. But I was there to explore the unknown, to challenge my skepticism. As I lay there in the dim room, awaiting sleep or perhaps something more spectral, a faint humming in the air lingered, an almost palpable sensation, as if the room itself held a ghostly life of its own. And then it happened. Out of the room's dead silence, the sound of a woman weeping jerked me awake. I remember a chill running its icy fingers along my spine, a feeling of dread creeping over me. I knew the house was a historical landmark, famed for its supernatural residents, but I also knew that the room next door was vacant for the night. The weeping grew in intensity, a soft and mournful sound that echoed sorrowfully in the room's stillness. Something in me stirred, a glimmering spark of curiosity. Is this for real? Is this part of the experience? I wondered. I decided to get to the bottom of it. Slipping into my bathrobe, I cautiously stepped into the dark, dimly lit hallway. With each careful step, met by the resistance of creaking floorboards. The ghostly sobs echoed in my ears, growing louder and more desolate as I reached the door. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, only to reveal an empty room. No spectral figure draped in white, no mournful woman in sight. But the room wasn't empty, not to the senses. It still felt charged with sorrow, the echo of grief dwelling within its walls. With my flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness, I scanned the room, hoping against hope to catch a glimpse or any sign of the supernatural. But all I caught was the old Victorian bed, pillows still fluffed, and the rocking chair sitting peacefully in the corner. The weeping had ceased the moment I swung the door open, heart pounding and mind buzzing with a mix of fear and disappointment. I retreated back to my room. It was a long night as I laid awake in the bed, alert for any more ghostly weeping, the silence of the room pressing down on me. As dawn ushered in soft rays of light, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, questioning the boundaries of my sanity. Could I have imagined the crying? Was I so engrossed in the historical horror of the house that I dreamed up the tormented weeping? The questions lingered. Checking out later that morning, I was met with a knowing smirk from the front desk clerk as I recounted my tale. I was just another visitor with a ghostly tale to tell. Today, as I pen this chilling experience, the memory of that room, cast in moonlight, and the painstakingly real sounds of weeping still echoes in my ear. That night, the skeptic within me was silenced, perhaps indefinitely. While I walked into the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast a skeptic, I walked out a believer. The crying of an unseen woman in an unoccupied room was enough to convince me. Fair warning for all to be ready for the unexpected when embarking on the ghostly realms. Be it weeping women or shifting shadows, the persuasiveness of the other side can be surprisingly unsettling. A few years back, something weird happened to me. It still feels fresh in my mind. It was a warm, clear summer night in late June when I was out camping in Mount Rainier National Park, Washington. I've always enjoyed camping since I was a kid. For me, it wasn't just about escaping. It was also about feeling like I was part of something major and raw. I felt like I fit in out there beneath the huge sky, among trees way older than my great-grandparents. So, I was there, settled in my snug little tent after a full day of hiking and fishing. The dying campfire looked like bright orange stars, throwing shadows all over the campsite that swayed with the light night wind. I was in my sleeping bag, hearing an owl hoot far off, the wind shaking the pine branches, and my friend quietly snoring in his tent next to mine. It was really calm. I guess I fell asleep, because the next thing I knew, I woke up all startled. It was dead quiet. Even my friend wasn't snoring anymore. It was really quiet, so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. The fire was out and it was so dark, I couldn't see anything. Everything looked like shadows. I wasn't sure why I woke up, but I felt quite uneasy. My heart began racing before I could figure out why. I was lying around, not really paying attention to anything when I got this creepy feeling, like somebody was spying on me. I can't really describe it well, but it felt like something was hanging over me or pushing down on me. I thought it might have been one of the other campers getting a snack in the middle of the night. But I had a feeling it wasn't just that. I had a gut feeling that something was off. The air just didn't feel right. It was as if I could taste fear, kind of like bitter almonds. I was totally freaking out from deep down in my gut. The weird part? I never really saw it. Not like you'd normally see something. Honestly, I felt it. Something fishy, like a dodgy light bulb, was going on at the campsite. It was dark, serious, and kind of threatening. It felt like it was checking us out, just observing. But for what, I couldn't tell. And it wasn't entirely quiet. Over the sound of my racing heartbeat, I heard something like breathing, really slow and steady. It was really quiet, practically silent. Unless you were really on edge, you wouldn't have heard a thing. After that, there was this strong, natural smell, way more intense than anything I've ever smelled when I've gone camping, with a hint of something else. I was scared to even budge. Heck, I was barely breathing. My heart was drumming so hard I thought whoever, or whatever, was out there could likely hear it. I was just there, stuck in my sleeping bag like a burrito, wishing it was all a dream that I'd wake up from. But I didn't. It was real. There I was by myself in the tent, frozen with fear because of this. They kept watching us. So, as you see, it was only the start. Then the creature came out into the open. It sure seemed that way. It felt like something huge was moving behind the tree line. I froze, my gut telling me to hide and stop breathing. Out of nowhere, the moonlight broke through the clouds and lit up the creature. I guess I should thank the moon for that. But what I saw still creeps me out. There was something by the forest, super hard to see given how dark it was. It was huge, definitely taller than any person. Think 6 or 7 feet at least. It looked like it had 2 legs, kinda like a person but bent really weirdly. Could hardly see its head, but it was a bit like a dinosaur's or a lizard's with a huge, scary mouth. Even with the bad lighting, I could make out that the creature was moss green, same as the stuff growing on a rotting log. Its skin was scaly, sorta like a reptile's, and even kind of shined a bit under the moonlight. The creepiest part was its eyes, glowing yellow, like 2 small flames in the dark. As I watched, the creature moved a bit, its big form moving smoothly and almost silently. I could tell my friend was also awake in his tent, likely as bothered by the quietness as I was. But I didn't dare yell out to him. The animal kept hanging around the edge of the clearing, and then it kinda tilted its head like it was smelling the air or listening to something. I noticed its huge black claws flex, and could hear the wind blowing against its scales. I was lying there for what felt like forever, completely frozen in fear. It's funny how fear can either stop you in your tracks or kick you into action. At that time, I was totally stuck. But as the night went on, that intense fear started to fade, especially as morning began to break. I was so tired that it overpowered my fear, and I finally managed to sleep, but it wasn't a peaceful one. When I woke up, the sun was shining on my face. It felt so different in the morning with birds chirping, leaves rustling, and my friends' loud snoring. The fear from last night seemed like a faint dream now because of the bright morning. But as soon as I looked towards the forest, I got scared again. When morning came, I saw these huge footprints on the soft ground. It was kind of mocking my short break. I'm not sure what made those marks that night. It could have been Bigfoot, or maybe a bear, or a giant bird walking on 2 feet. I didn't want to think it was a reptilian. That's not something you'd expect, even when hiking in the wild. But I get this weird feeling whenever I think of those bright eyes. Even now, I sometimes catch myself looking over my shoulder. I still do it even after so many years. I'm no stranger to a late-night fish. Out there on the lake under the stars, there's a piece you can't find anywhere else. This happened at Milford Lake in Kansas. It's usually so quiet there, perfect for catching some huge catfish. Or at least that's what I was expecting to wrestle with that night. Some people might not get why I love fishing at night, but if they saw the sunset from a rocking boat, they'd get it. It's not just about catching fish. It's about the quiet, being alone, and the soft sounds of the world changing from day to night. I typically start setting up around dusk. I gather my gear, my trusty old rod and reel, and the earthy smell of live bait jostling in its tub. Once everything's ready, I'll cast that first line out into the calm waters. I really like that almost silent plop when the lure hits the water. Once the hooks are set, it's just me and the stars. The world just fades away, leaving nothing but me, my line, and waiting for that telltale tug of a fish. Casting my line that night, I remember the distinct feeling that something was off. The air felt weird, kind of electric, and it was way too quiet. Even the bugs had stopped buzzing. After a while, my attention was entirely swallowed up by this suffocating stillness. Out on the water, as odd as it sounds, the feeling of being watched isn't that unusual. Moving shadows are part of the package, especially when the wind gets to swaying the reeds and tree limbs along the lakeshore. However, what I felt wasn't just the mystery of the darkness. It was a more invasive type of anticipation. Every time I cast the line or felt a tug, it felt like I was getting closer to something big. It felt like everything was just waiting for something big to happen, like the calm before a storm. The tension was so palpable that the night silence seemed more like an anxious humming in my ears. During one of my casts, with my line out in the dark, I heard this huge splash from the other side of the lake. It wasn't the splash of a fish leaping or turtle submerging. No, this was a heavy, forceful splash, like a waterlogged branch had finally given in to the pull of water. But when I tried to see what made the noise, I couldn't see anything in the dark. Moments later, what followed was a low growl that rolled across the dark surface, a sound that seemed both primal and dreadful, cutting through the night and stirring up an intense fear I didn't know I had in me. As an angler, you come prepared for the wildlife. It's part of what you know you'll be dealing with when you're in Mother Nature's territory. But that sound, it was nothing I'd ever encountered in my many years of fishing at night on the water. I couldn't imagine anything like it, not in this lake. It was like something straight out of a nightmare. So that was just the start. Out of nowhere, the quiet of the night was broken by the sound of rustling reeds. I couldn't help but look where the noise was coming from. I swear that I then saw a pair of glowing eyes staring right back at me, but it was hard to see clearly with just the moonlight. Those eyes were yellow and really piercing. Never seen anything like them before. They seemed kinda otherworldly. I was freaking out, but also kind of curious. Truly, I couldn't tell if I was more scared or interested. Was it just some animal looking weird in the dark? Or was there something stranger about it? I remember this chill going up my back. Felt like a bad sign, like something scary was about to happen. And then, the creature emerged. It was big, really big, and stood on two legs. I felt sick seeing this huge shadow slip out of the water. The moonlight was shining on its scaly skin. It was there for just a moment, but it felt like a big deal. Like I was seeing something I shouldn't. Its head, similar to a dinosaur or lizard, hosted a set of sharp teeth glinting in the moonlight, a sight stamped to never fade from my memory. I was so shocked I couldn't move. Then I watched as it submerged again, and everything went quiet. 1 minute I'm just fishing alone, chilling, and the next I'm seeing something, like out of a legend. My peaceful spot wasn't the same anymore, and I was now worried about impending doom. I had no idea if it was coming for me under the water, and not being able to see it was almost worse than when I was looking right at it. Jolted by what was happening, my grip involuntarily loosened on the fishing rod, and I almost lost it in the water. I hastily began rowing back to shore and packing up my stuff simultaneously. I just knew in my gut I had to get out of there. I hustled, powered solely by adrenaline and the lingering dread, leaving behind the once comforting darkness of the lake. Returning home, I was haunted by recurring visions of the creature, of those glowing eyes imprinted on my mind, lurking amidst my nightmares. Now my favorite fishing spot just doesn't feel right. I keep wondering what else might be under that water. Eventually, that first night passed, the sun rose, and all seemed somewhat normal again, but the haunting image of that face kept popping into my brain. Ever since then, every trip to the lake has been different. Now, even the sounds of the night don't feel peaceful anymore, and being out there alone just gives me the creeps. But there's something weird about it. Every time the moon's just right, or the wind whispers a certain way, I feel like the lake's calling me back. Ever since then, the night sky and the calm lake just don't seem the same to me. I want to tell you about something weird that happened in my backyard a while back. It's one of those things that just doesn't sit right with me. It happened at my place late in November in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Just me, the night, and that thing. Elizabethtown gets real quiet at night. You know, just the owls hooting, dogs barking now and then, and the rare car driving by. Oddly enough, on that particular Tuesday night, it was the unusual absence of these familiar sounds that first caught my attention, making the night feel even more silent and kind of spooky. Like any sensible person, I was wrapped up tight in a blanket on my porch swing, warm from the cold air. But those noises were different. Quiet, but in a strange way. It was a scratching sound, like nails on a blackboard, that really got under your skin. I'm not usually paranoid, never seen a ghost or anything. But my grandma always said to trust your gut, and it was telling me something was off. And boy, oh boy, was my gut rumbling bad, like there was a storm rolling in. But curiosity got the better of me. I mean, you'd be curious too if something was up, messing with the peace of your own backyard, wouldn't you? I felt kind of brave, I guess, grabbing my big flashlight from the corner of the porch. Thought maybe I'd find a raccoon or something. I had to give Tweeter, my old beagle, the slip, since I didn't want him getting in the way. Stepping off the porch, into the light of the moon, the silence was suffocating, but my adrenaline was pumping. I fumbled around, my flashlight cutting sharp lines into the darkness. I walked down the stone-laden pathway, heart thumping in my chest like a marching band, sweat trickling down my brow. I followed that scratching sound, pushing past the branches of that big maple tree in my yard, ducking under the ones hanging low. I was edging towards the old wooden shed in the left corner of my backyard, feeling my heart thunder against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every little rustle and shadow seemed louder and scarier, but I kept going, half worried, half curious. The noise got louder and more frantic, echoing in the quiet night. It gave me the creeps. As I approached, the pale beam of my flashlight danced along the ground, revealing restless, frenzied movements near the base of the shed. Large enough to make me think of a dog, only skinnier. Strange clicking noises started to mix with the rustling. That's when I saw it, this huge eye, shining weirdly in the light. I can't explain it, but whatever it was, it just didn't fit with my everyday life of dirty hands and late-night ball games. Now, I'm not talking about aliens and such, just something offbeat. This was not just a matter of an errant raccoon or a wandering dog. This thing was fast, way too fast for any normal animal. It moved in a weird, twisty way that just didn't seem right. But I was still squinting into the gloom, so I wasn't quite sure what I was up against. This was the point where my common sense wrestled back control. I still had no real idea of what was lurking in the shadows, mix of fear and curiosity swirling within me, with no clear winner. Suddenly, the flashlight beam landed on some movement again. It was an odd shape, definitely not human, but not entirely alien either. Under the flash, the night shrunk, and the pale, almost translucent skin of the creature jumped into focus. It was on all fours, kind of like a person trying to move like a deer, but it was bulkier and moved too smoothly. I caught a glimpse of it, and I wish I'd never seen it. Its skin was this sickly color, kind of like dough that's been left out for too long. Its body was so gaunt you could count the ribs. It moved kind of graceful but weird, like a dog trying to walk on its hind legs or something. And its face, it was human but not quite. Large black eyes, and an open gaping mouth that fell inwards into a sucking void. I felt this deep primal fear looking at it. Like all those fears you can't put into words, of the dark, of unknown things, of being hunted. I couldn't tell if it knew I was there or felt scared of me. It just paused momentarily and resumed its gait across the yard, pale body oscillating in the dim light, throwing long, uncanny shadows. I just panicked, my heart pounding, and I couldn't even catch my breath. I forgot everything. Tweeter's whine echoing from the house, the birds' absent chirping, the distant hum of a vehicle on the dirt road. It was like time slowed down, and there I was, just staring at this thing moving in my yard. Stunned, I stood frozen, space around me turning oddly distant. I don't know how long I stood like that, maybe a minute or an hour, I can't say. Eventually, the thing disappeared in the darkness, dissolving into the underbrush at the edge of the yard. A hollow quiet settled, pressing down on me, the peculiar noises entirely absent now. In the days to follow, I found myself returning to that night, again and again, wrestling with disbelief in the harsh light of reality. Sometimes I couldn't sleep, just lying there staring into the dark, my heart beating fast. I'd often end up on the back porch at dusk, the growing shadows scaring me all over again. But the nights fell into the usual routine, and the strange creature never returned. You might think I'm nuts, imagining weird stuff in the dark. I myself considered that, questioning my sobriety, my sanity. But I keep thinking about how quiet it was, how eerie that night felt. I couldn't have just made it all up. So, I was driving down this country road in Alabama one night. I just grabbed some snacks from the local convenience store and was heading back to my motel near the Sipsey Wilderness. You know, it's one of those places with thick forests and all sorts of weird stories. Now, I'm usually not one for spooky tales or local lore, but there's something about driving through these secluded southern roads late at night that gets your imagination running wild. You know how it is when everything feels more intense at night. Sounds are louder, and every shadow looks a bit off. The way the branches cast shadows in my headlights was kind of spooky, really got my imagination going. It wasn't that I was scared at that point. Not exactly. I was just being cautious, you know? After all, you never know. The only company I had was the low rumble of my truck engine and the occasional rustle of my tarp-covered load in the back. But this night felt different. It was unsettlingly quiet. An oppressive stillness wrapped around me, more suffocating than calming. The moon was barely lighting up the road, and my headlights were just cutting through the dark. The wilderness was like this big, dark wall. To break the silence, I turned on some oldies on the radio, the vintage tunes filling the cabin of my truck. But for some reason, the music didn't make me feel any better. It just made me feel more alone in all that darkness. I didn't know it then, but I was about to have an encounter that would chill this seasoned long hauler to the bone. As I drove along the sinewy road, the headlights suddenly cast their gaze on a figure up ahead. At first, I thought it was a person, stranded maybe. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make out the details, but I was wrong. It wasn't a person, not quite. This was something unsettling. It was tall, easily over 6 feet, and astonishingly thin. It was so skinny, its bones were sticking out like crazy. And then came its head, ridiculously large, hanging heavily over its spindly body. The moonlight made its big round head look even weirder. I caught a glimpse of 2 beady eyes peering through the darkness. All other features were hard to make out. There was also an unnaturalness about the figure. The shock slowed my driving to a crawl, and for a moment, time just stopped. The most unsettling factor was not its appearance, but the way it just stood there in the middle of the road, as if frozen in time, unaffected by my approaching vehicle. The truck's engine, which seemed so loud a few minutes ago, was now a distant drone. Everything just got really confusing and blurry. Observing the skeletal figure in the middle of the road, a cold, sinking feeling started settling at the base of my spine. And then, just like that, the figure started to ascend, gradually blending into the night sky, swallowed by the darkness above me. As quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, and just like that, it disappeared, like a ghost. But that's not even the weirdest part. I hit the brakes hard, stopping right where I'd seen the figure. My heart was racing as I fumbled for my flashlight. I don't know what had gotten into me. Curiosity, perhaps, or a desperate need to rationalize what I'd just seen. I just sat there for a moment, my breath fogging up the windshield. I stepped out, the flashlight's beam cutting through the dark. It was freezing outside, the cold biting through my clothes. I stood there, in the middle of an empty road, searching for any trace of evidence. But there was nothing there. No signs, no remnants, no indication whatsoever that something extraordinary had just taken place. As I turned back to my truck, the faint smell of something metallic hit me. It was so sudden and so strong, it made my head spin. It was strange because it wasn't like anything I'd expect to associate with the wilderness. Was I just imagining it, or was it something left by that creature? I could never tell. I jumped back into the safety of my truck. My hands shook as I turned the ignition and drove off. My headlights lit the empty road ahead, but it felt different now. Every shadow looked creepy, and every little noise spooked me. I drove the rest of the way feeling really uneasy. I kept seeing those bizarre figures out of the corner of my eyes, darting in and out of the shadows cast by the trees lining the road. I kept telling myself it was just shadows, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I reached the motel without any further incident, but the following days were filled with a dread I couldn't shake off. This wasn't just a bad dream. It really happened. I couldn't help wondering, was it a random encounter, or had the creature wanted to be seen? At the truck stop diners the following days, I scoured local newspapers and exchanged stories with other drivers, hoping to find similar encounters. Some would listen, others would laugh. I couldn't just tell myself it was all in my head or just shadows. The lost town in Alabama, its quiet roads, that skeletal figure, the sudden ascension, they were all real and unforgettable. As I recollect these events, the metallic still lingers in my nostrils. It shows back up every time I think about what happened. Looking back, that encounter changed me. I'm not as skeptical anymore about local myths or the stories of strange creatures lurking in the shadows. The world's a lot bigger and stranger than we think, with all sorts of mysteries and creatures we don't know about. And I'm here to tell you to be careful when you're out there, and don't doubt your instincts if they're trying to tell you something. I reckon it was around 3, maybe 4 years ago. I've always liked a bit of adventure, exploring new places and all. But that night was way different than anything I'd expected. It was in Tennessee in the summer, out in the country near the old Bell Witch Cave. Everyone around here knows the legends about that place. Everyone from absolute believers to hardcore skeptics has their own take on it. I was somewhere in the middle, not sure what to believe. We've all grown up hearing stories about the witch and the spooky things in that cave. I suppose I wanted to see if there was anything to it. I'd planned my visit for a full moon night. True or not, those old tales, they kind of draw you in, you know? To the idea of potentially running into something otherworldly under the cold light of a full moon. I remember reaching the cave entrance and seeing the moonlight creating long shadows over the entrance. It was eerie. I shook off a chill, steadied myself, and went in. It was super quiet inside other than a faint dripping noise. I was familiar with quiet places, but the silence inside this cave was unique. It was absolute. It was like stepping into a different world. I moved slowly in the cold, humid air. My flashlight showed the rough walls and the ceiling dripping. All the natural sounds of a cave. But how do I put this? There was a sense of waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. It made me want to whisper instead of talk, to walk slowly so as not to disturb, well, whatever was in there. I'd been in the cave for about half an hour or so. Don't rightly remember what I was doing. Just poking around, looking at formations and such. The passage got narrower, the roof dripped more, and the air felt heavy and musty, like something was rotting. That's when things started to feel off. I heard a soft rustling, almost like feathers brushing against the ground. It was odd, and I remember thinking it was too gentle a sound for such a place. I got goosebumps trying to hear it again, but it was gone, and everything was too still. The air somehow felt denser, and a sense of dread crept in. Why? I didn't know. But I did know I was not alone, that I was sure of. And meanwhile, I had no idea just how scary it was about to get. Little did I know what awaited me in the heart of that cave. Then the cold hit me. It was so cold, it felt like something was squeezing me. I realized how incredibly cold it had become in the cave, chilling me to the bone. It was the kind of cold that gets inside your head. And the sense of being watched, well, it amped up to something that felt very intrusive and personal. It put me on edge. I was scared. And that's the only word for what I was feeling, scared. I still can't explain what happened next. I felt like something was watching me, and it wasn't friendly. But for a long time, I didn't see anything. Then, out of nowhere, there was this weird, creepy laughter. It sounded almost human and echoed all around. Gave me the chills. I spun around, shining my flashlight all over the place. That's when I saw them. These glowing red eyes staring at me from deep in the cave. Even with the cave all dark and confusing, I could tell those weren't human eyes. They were just too intense, too scary. I was sure it wasn't human. I bolted. Call it instinct or whatever. But everything in me was screaming to get out. It was telling me to run. So I just ran. I hardly remember getting out of that cave. I was really scared. All I wanted to do was get out, and I bet I must have been running through that devil of a cave faster than I ever did. The whole thing was a blur. Next thing I knew, I was outside, panting in the moonlight. I collapsed right there, too shell-shocked to move. When I finally calmed down, I had only one question. What in the world was that? I've heard tales of skinwalkers, mythical creatures that can take the form of any critter. But I never believed what I heard. Yet there it was, real, terrifying. Had I been face to face with folklore, reality, I don't know. All I knew was that it wasn't a part of my world, not part of any world that I called safe or normal. Yet it existed, undeniably real and chillingly present. Since that night, it's something I struggle to comprehend. Did I cross the fine line between the known world and folklore? What happened to me in the Bell Witch Cave? I guess I might never know. I guess I have to live with not knowing, hoping that going forward I can still tell what's real from what's just a story. I think that might be what has me scared the most. The fact that I'm finding it hard to believe even my own thoughts. A couple years back in June, I found this place near Springer Mountain in Georgia. It was the perfect spot for a peaceful jog along the Appalachian Trail. At first, that day was as close as you'll get to perfection. It was that time of year when spring turns to summer. Birds chirping, a nice sunny day with a bit of a breeze. Everything was green and bright, really welcoming. Being a city boy from Memphis, having moved to Georgia recently, I was new to this trail. It had everything I loved. It was secluded, not crowded like Atlanta's parks, and the challenging terrain got my heart racing. Didn't totally escape the outside world though. But for those precious moments, it was just me, the trail, and nature. That morning, a Saturday, I had set out on my usual run around 8 after a light breakfast. I run because it clears my head, keeps me sane in this madly rushing world. Plus, it gives me a chance to lose myself, just for a little while, in something that isn't serious. I was so caught up in the peacefulness, I didn't even notice I'd gone deeper into the trail than usual. Maybe I was in an adventurous mood, or just got carried away with the rhythm of my run. I was deep in the heart of the lush mountainside, maybe about 5 miles from where I started. By the time I caught my bearings and decided to turn back, the surroundings seemed different, unfamiliar. I shrugged it off, put it down to venturing into a new section of the trail. It's funny how your mind messes with you when you find yourself alone somewhere new. I shook off the uneasy feeling, but opted to pick up my pace on instinct. As I rounded a particularly dense clump of trees, a stench hit me. It was strong and honestly pretty revolting. It smelled awful, like rotten fruit in a hot, damp place, and it was strong. I stopped dead in my tracks, gagging slightly. And that's when I heard it, a sound, primal and raw, echoing through the silence. The noise was strange, kind of like a growl mixed with a bark. It sounded rough and scary enough to make me shiver. I can tell no bird or squirrel makes that kind of sound. I felt a chill of fear, standing there in the bright morning light, something you wouldn't expect in such a picturesque setting. But there I was, caught in a sudden sense of dread. I thought the woods would go quiet again after the noise stopped, but instead, there was this odd, tense feeling in the air. It felt like that weird calm you get before a storm. I tried to focus on the path leading back home, steering my thoughts away from the bone-chilling noise and hoping that whatever animal it was, it would stay away from me. Then, out of nowhere, This huge figure just stepped out from the shadows. It shocked me as much as if a tree had suddenly fallen. It moved gracefully despite its colossal size, flickering in and out of my sight as it navigated through the maze of trees. It was like something you'd hear about in a campfire story, not real at all. So there, in the relative quiet of the woods, stood a towering, brawny creature. When I say this thing was colossal, I mean it. Easily 8, maybe 9 feet tall, with a chest broader than a barrel. It was rippling with power, its massive, long arms swaying slightly as it examined the area with deep-set eyes. Its face was scarred and rugged, with a strong jaw, big forehead, and nostrils flaring. Its hair was patchy, thin in some places and thicker in others. It was light brown, with some really dark spots. Maybe that was for hiding. Even from a distance, there was this terrible smell coming off it, like rotten meat and something burning, and it just hit my nose hard. A subtle noise came from its throat, like a soft, restrained growl that vibrated beneath the silence of the forest. Its eyes locked onto mine. I'd love to say I was brave or something, but really, I was totally freaked out. My breath hitched, and I struggled to move. Fear pinned me to the ground as those deep-set eyes kept their gaze fixed on me. It seemed like forever, but then it just huffed, kind of disappointed-like, and walked back into the trees. It was like a mountain casually moving. I took off then, pelting down the trail as fast as my legs could take me. All I could hear was my heartbeat pounding in my ears as I ran. I practically stumbled my way through the rest of my run, dashing towards the safety of my car. Back in my car, safe, I just sat there. What I had seen was surreal, something out of a sci-fi movie or nature documentary. Over the next few days, it felt like I was in a daze, questioning my sanity and logic, trying to rationalize what I'd seen as a bear or a homeless guy in a costume. But deep down, I knew what I had witnessed, that those images etched in my memory were beyond the reaches of my imagination. I had encountered a Sasquatch, a creature considered a myth by many, and I felt a flash of vindication, a rush that was almost thrilling. It didn't matter if people wrote my story off as crazy talk. Something rare and amazing had happened, and even though I didn't fully understand it, it felt like a strange kind of gift. It was a misty, clear night in Savannah. A cold chill crept along the cobblestones in the dark alleys. It was the kind of cold that nips at your skin as you walk through the old part of town. It's a beautiful place, though, with old buildings that seem like they've got a lot of stories to tell. Some folks, well actually a lot of folks say these buildings are haunted. They say spirits dwell here, forever trapped in their homes, and you can feel the history in these buildings, like they're still holding on to the past. I've always been curious about this stuff, which is why I'm drawn to these old supposedly haunted buildings in Savannah. Part of me can't wait to see if these ghost stories are true, but another part of me keeps thinking they're just rumors. It was getting dark when I decided to check out one of these buildings. An old mansion that used to be grand, but now it's pretty run down. The wind was making eerie noises through the cracked windows and broken shutters, mixing with the distant sounds of the city. It was eerily calm, peaceful yet filled with an uncanny stillness that made the hair on my neck prickle. I walked past the old, broken fence and onto the front porch. My footsteps echoed in the quiet, giving me chills. The wood creaked under my boots, and the old mansion looked even more spooky under the dim moonlight. When I stepped inside, it was so dark that my flashlight hardly made a difference. I could make out hints of grandeur past. Banisters that once held elegant spirals, wallpaper now hanging, peeling off the wall. You could almost hear echoes of the past, like the place was frozen in time. The cool wind outside had turned to a breathless chill indoors, the ice-cold wooden floors adding to the uncanniness. As I continued to wander through the aged mansion, amidst broken relics of another era and faded fragments of furnishings, I chanced upon a staircase. As I climbed the newly emerged stairway into the pitch black, my heart thudded loudly in my chest. And then I heard it, a noise that was not my own. This weird clicking sound, like someone tapping a pipe. really light but clear. Then, another noise soon followed, a low scratching, a soft echo that seemed like something dragging itself across the floor, crawling quickly from one point of the room to the other. The sounds, unsettling as they were in the silence, seemed to be closing in, drawing nearer with each passing moment. A wave of unease washed over me as curiosity wrestled fear. Part of me thought it was just the old house messing with my head, but another part really wanted to see what was hiding in the dark. Gathering my courage, I stepped forward and rounded the corner. My flashlight's weak beam swept across an old rundown ballroom. It got colder, like the draft was wrapping around me. The feeling of anticipation suddenly morphed into something else: dread. The once intriguing darkness now felt unwelcome, stifling. My usual skepticism disappeared, leaving me feeling exposed in the growing darkness. In the far edge of the room, I thought I saw the shadows seem to shift, forming a vague silhouette different from the surrounding gloom. That subtle distinction made my heart skip a beat. A bunch of things flashed through my mind: the mansion, the ghost stories, the weird sounds, and then that shape that didn't belong. It was then I finally saw it, the crawler. The shape started to move, gracefully, eerily, almost floating above the tattered remains of what might have once been a polished oak floor. This figure was super thin and way taller than any normal person, crawling around on all fours. It moved quickly, like it was hunting. Its eyes seemed to swallow whatever slight light broke the darkness, leaving behind twin pools of utter blackness. I couldn't see a nose or any clear features, just a huge mouth that looked like it was opening into a bottomless pit. I was shivering, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it over that creepy clicking sound echoing around. The room suddenly felt smaller, the ceiling lower, my flashlight beam dimmer. I felt a rush of adrenaline telling me to run, but I couldn't move or look away from it. Dread turned to primal fear, and fear turned to instinct. Before I knew it, I was backing away, finally able to move. I kept my eyes on that thing, the crawler, as I moved back as fast as I could. Another shiver shot down my spine, and I could swear it was watching me too, following my every move. When I finally got outside, I could breathe again, and the fear started to fade. I was out of that mansion, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of that encounter with the crawler. For the first time, I wasn't just some skeptic or curious tourist. I was right in the middle of the kind of ghost story I always thought was just make-believe. Now, all the stories about haunted places in Savannah, the ghosts the locals talk about, seemed a lot more real. This wasn't just a wake-up call. It completely changed how I saw things. Glancing back at the mansion, it wasn't just an old building anymore. It was a place full of lost stories, forgotten times, and creepy stuff like my run-in with the crawler. A part of me hoped that was the last I'd seen of the eerie entity. But the explorer in me knew the mystery was probably far from over, and so ended my first terrifying encounter with the totally real haunted side of Savannah. So I was up in Maine's Acadia National Park. Beautiful place. Some of the squad from the force and I were up there for a training exercise. It was this team-building thing where everyone attempts to survive a weekend without the comforts of modern living. And trust me, it's harder than it sounds, especially for the newbies. The night skies up there were something else too. Brilliant stars, clean air. But enough of the tourism talk. On to my story. Setting up camp was the usual mix of people who knew what they were doing, and those who didn't. Pretty standard fare. Despite some of the grumbling and ribbing of each other, we were all starting to have a pretty good time. We pitched camp near Jordan Pond. It's got quite a view, especially at sunset. Almost made me forget that we were up here on training. And there's nothing like swapping over the top stories about bravery and heroics over food. The food might not have been gourmet, but it sure tasted good after a day of survival skills. And that's about when the calm shattered. There's always that one moment that you can pinpoint when things on a normal day take a nosedive on days that go awry. Maybe the laughter died down, or perhaps the birds went silent, but something changed, and we all felt it looking into the darkness. We were law enforcement officers after all, so when something didn't feel right, we noticed. Then, a rustling from the bushes cut our conversation short. A cloud had passed over the moon, and the once vibrant campsite was swathed in a sudden darkness that left us squinting into the inky void. None of us are the type to be put off or easily become nervous, but this feeling, it was deep, like that feeling you get when you know something's watching you. For a moment, there was nothing, just the wind, and then, I swear, there was this slithering, scratching sound from the bushes. None of us moved. Even us, tough law enforcement guys, were frozen like kids scared of some unseen boogeyman under the bed. Someone flicked on a flashlight, the beam shaking all over the place, but we still didn't see anything. Just shadows, bushes, and trees dancing in the chilling wind. "Don't freak out," I remember whispering to Rodriguez, the rookie who couldn't have been a day over 22. "It was probably just a deer or something," I said. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. There was more to it than that. I knew that for certain. This felt different than your usual wildlife encounter. The rustling and that uncomfortable feeling of being watched. I'm not sure what made me do it. Maybe it was just how uneasy we all felt. But I caught myself squinting into the night, trying to see through the darkness and following the sound. In the dim light, my gaze eventually fell upon an odd shape that stood out from the shadows. It was huge, much taller than your average bear or moose. It was hard to tell exactly how tall it was. Somewhere between 8 to 10 feet, I guess. Either way, it was just huge. But what really got to me was its shape. It just looked wrong somehow. It was a strange mix, parts familiar, parts totally unknown. Like, it stood on two legs, but its head was something out of a dinosaur movie or a lizard, not a mammal. A jolt of adrenaline surged through me, and I yelled back to the others. The jokes and laughter stopped dead. We all felt it, even Rodriguez, the rookie. He was staring, clutching his flashlight like it was his lifeline. Honestly, none of us knew what to do. This wasn't just a bear or a raccoon. This was something other. So we did the only thing we could think of as cops. We cautiously approached it. Being cops, we're used to being on guard and handling tense situations. We're trained for dealing with people, but not whatever this was. As we got closer, I could see it better. The creature seemed to be watching us as well, its piercing yellow eyes coming to focus in the sweeping beam of our flashlights. The weirdest part? There was something almost human in the way it reacted, cunning even, as if it was gauging us, understanding our approach. And then as suddenly as we spotted it, it was gone. It didn't run off or slither away or anything. 1 second it was there, the next just gone. Vanished into thin air, I would say, if I could trust my eyes that night. All that was left was this eerie silence and a weird feeling in our chests. We were shaken up. Some of us were even scared. We didn't sleep much that night and stayed close to the fire till sunrise, taking turns dozing off just a bit as we sat there. We spoke little of it, and whenever we did, it was quietly, as if speaking about it louder might summon the creature back. Back home, I replayed the incident in my mind. I was trying desperately to wrap my head around what we'd seen, what it meant. I thought about the stories I heard as a kid about strange beings, about people who vanished in dense forests, never to come home. To this day, I don't know what we encountered that night. It's a humbling reminder that there's still so much out there in the world, beyond us, beyond human understanding. I just got around to sorting through all the pictures of my last trip to Plymouth, Massachusetts. If it's Plymouth, you know I had to add to my collection of haunt pictures. As a photographer who loves history, I've always been drawn to old graveyards. There's something about the air there, heavy with history, that just gets me. It was a Friday, early afternoon. Plymouth was so quiet that day, it felt like the perfect day to wander in a cemetery. The headstones looked really old, shining under the sun. I was there with my headphones on, playing classic rock, and my camera in hand. I walked among the tombstones, carefully navigating the paths between them as I peered at each unique marker. letting my fingertips graze the weathered script. I felt like the old stones and moss were telling stories of the people who were buried there. I know it's weird to find comfort in these old graves, but hey, it's history, right? There were beautiful headstones, some broken and worn down by the grueling New England weather, others surprisingly sharp and neat in their preservation. Some of the grave markers dated back to the 1700s. I snapped a few shots of particularly striking tombstones, the deep, angular shadows creating a contrast in the images I was hoping to capture. I passed by an enormous oak, its gnarled branches casting long, eerily human-like shadows over a section of tombstones, its leaves rustling. That's when I felt it. The air changed. I started to see my breath in the cold air. Startled, I glanced around, somehow knowing it wasn't the eccentric New England weather making me cold. I got this weird shiver, and the silence of the graveyard seemed louder than Freddie Mercury, who was singing in my ears. And then, out of nowhere, a strange, damp, earthy scent entered my nose. It freaked me out, but then, at the same time, my camera beeped, and I snapped back to what I was doing. My camera had captured something on its passive lens, and it had automatically focused on something. I looked at the viewfinder, but all it showed was an expectantly blank screen. Confused, I scrolled back to my last snap, a random shot of a dilapidated tombstone being strangled by ivy. I didn't see this when I took the picture, but in the replay, I could see an ethereal, misty wisp wrapped around the stone and ivy, partially transparent, but 100% there. Had my lens been foggy? I checked it, but it was clear. I told myself it was probably just a lens flare or something. No need to get freaked out. Resuming my exploration, I decided to leave this to be examined later. Yet a prickle of unease continued to linger in my mind. It was clear that something was going on that just was not right. As the day wore on, the coldness clung to the air more persistently, reminding me of what I had seen in that photograph. I kept walking. I was more careful with each photo I took, like I was expecting something to happen. Then it happened again, a stronger chill this time. And there was this faint clanking sound, like metal jingling, carried by the wind. Without thinking, I snapped a photo, my heart racing. But this time, when I looked into the viewfinder, there it was. Behind this really old headstone, my camera showed a blurry shape, kind of like something ghost-shaped. It was a tall, kind of flowing shape, no clear lines or anything, just a bunch of blurred shapes that kind of looked like a person. Where its face should be, there were these dim shadows, almost like glowing eyes. It looked like it was wearing old-time clothes and maybe holding chains, just like in those classic ghost stories. A cold shiver ran through me, and something inside told me to get out of there. But for some reason, I couldn't move, just staring at the photo, weirdly fascinated. It was a ghost. I had a picture of a potential ghost, I thought, my blood pounding heavy in my veins. I felt around me an energy shift, a spiking electric thrill. The cold air suddenly softened, and a quiet fell around me. Leaving the graveyard, I was quivering with the prospect of what I'd possibly captured. As soon as I got home, I knew I had to talk to Sarah, a friend who studied photography and who also had a strange interest for paranormal phenomena. I was hoping she could shed light on what I had captured in my photographs, or just make me feel more at ease. She told me that she too had found similar images on some of her photographs. She firmly believed that she had captured images of ghosts, people from the past who, for some reason, had not yet been able to move on to the afterlife. She didn't know why they were still there, or if they were dangerous, but she firmly believed they were real. Her instincts leaned towards them being gentle souls just looking for help. This calmed me a bit, knowing I wasn't alone in this. Ghost stories started to feel a bit more real for me that day. I mean, a lot of history is just things we don't fully understand, right? Maybe it's not so crazy to think that parts of life hang around after they're gone, like shadows or whispers in a graveyard. A few summers back, something really weird happened to me. I hope never to experience anything like it again. This happened in a remote cabin in Chippewa National Forest, deep in the heart of Minnesota. I took that trip to find a quiet place to relax. I just needed to get away from my boring day job. I thought a cabin in the woods would do the trick. The cabin was between two mountains, by a small lake. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, that fresh, wild forest smell. It was perfect for some alone time. I was hoping to finish the book I'd been writing for too long, do some hiking, maybe even try my hand at some fishing in the lake. The first few days were super peaceful, just as I wanted. I spent my days writing and hiking, and evenings were all about relaxing in the cabin and cooking. The quiet was nice, but after a couple of days, I realized the nights were quieter than I thought they'd be. I brushed it off, thinking maybe I wasn't used to the ambient sounds of the forest just yet. As the days passed, I finally shook off my writer's block. I spent whole nights typing away on the computer, my concentration only broken intermittently by the dancing flames in the fireplace or the occasional splash from the lake outside. Being alone in nature was doing me good, or so I thought. After writing late into the evening one night, I went outside for some air. The moon on the lake and the breeze through the trees were calming. Then, something caught my attention. It was subtle at first, the faintest rustle that seemed too deliberate, too rhythmic to be just the wind. A smell hit me next, pungent, almost moldy. The odor was so strong it made my eyes water. Then came the sounds, strange sounds that rumbled at a frequency that was hard to pinpoint. It was a deep sound, with a strange echo, as if resonating from a large, deep chest. It made my hair stand on end. Suddenly, the peaceful forest didn't seem so welcoming. Right away, I knew that something was lurking, and that was my first inkling of the terror that was to unfold that summer night. The sound came again, closer this time, that same guttural growl, followed by a howl. It wasn't like a wolf or coyote. It was deeper, again almost like it came from a huge chest, but it also sounded disturbingly human-like. It made me feel uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. I never thought I was brave, but something got into me. I just grabbed my flashlight and went to check it out. I was hoping it was just something simple, or something explainable. You know, like an animal that had lost its way. I kept going towards the noise, every part of me on edge. It was so quiet and dark, it felt like a dream. Suddenly, from the faint moonlight illuminating the outskirts of the forest, I saw something. This thing was huge, like 7 feet tall, all covered in this thick, dark fur. Its legs were weird, kind of like a dog's, really muscular. But what was most terrifying was the way it stood upright, just like a human. Its snout was long, and as my flashlight beam darted to its face, a pair of yellow eyes glowed ominously back at me. It instantly snarled at me, showing off these long, sharp teeth that caught the moonlight. I stumbled backwards, my feet leading me towards the cabin, never taking my eyes off the beast. I managed to get inside, slamming and barricading the door, hoping that the wooden structure would stand a chance against the looming threat. I switched off the lights, hiding in the darkness, praying for that thing to go away. The rest of the night passed in agonizing tension, marked by its eerie growls that gradually receded further away, into the forest. I was up all night, just waiting for the sun to come up, to get away from that nightmare. I left at first light, vowing never to return to that godforsaken place. For weeks after, I couldn't stop thinking about it, and at night I'd swear I could still hear it howling. The peaceful solitude I loved was now ruined by this creature. I heard later from some locals about a creature they referred to as the Dog Man, a beast of terrifying stature and haunting yellow eyes. To think that I had come face to face with this horror made my blood run cold. Now surely as I sit back home in Ohio, far from those cursed woods, I cannot forget the ungodly sight of that creature, the awful stench, and the deep, haunting growls. Trust me, there's stuff out there in the woods, things we can't even begin to understand, and I, for one, would rather not peek into that dark world ever again. A few years back, as a freshman at the University of Kentucky, I was just trying to find my place, you know? At first, it was pretty scary. All the hustle and bustle, thousands of people everywhere. And also, the day in question wasn't just any night. It was Midnight Madness, the biggest event of the year at our school. Loud and exciting, for sure. A bunch of my dorm friends were huge into basketball. Me? I wasn't really into sports, but I loved the buzz in the air. That feeling when you know something big is about to happen. And according to whispers around the campus, this was not an event I'd want to miss. Funny how we see these first-year things as some magic step into adulthood. So there I was, hyped up on Mountain Dew in anticipation, ready to dive headfirst into that sea of school colors with complete enthusiasm. Keep in mind, this was like late October, so it was starting to get pretty cold at night. We had agreed to meet at a popular spot near the campus entrance, some sandwich shop that was usually empty, but that night, it was teeming with life. After some chit-chat and a quick sandwich, we began walking towards the Memorial Coliseum. The night was clear, and the blazing lights of the Coliseum were visible from a distance, partly because it's on a hill, but also because it was lit up like a UFO had just landed in Kentucky. As they kicked off the madness, the atmosphere was electric. Caught up in all the cheering, laughing, and everyone chanting together, it was super easy to just go with the flow. I was in the thick of it, laughing and cheering with the rest of them. It didn't matter that I didn't even really understand basketball. But then, things took a weird turn. We were all goofing around near the statue of former coach Adolph Rupp when I noticed something. Now, the weird part is, I couldn't exactly tell you what I saw. It was more like I felt it, this weird chill that made my skin tingle. All my fun vibes turned into this creeping dread, like that weird fear of something you can't explain. Something was watching us. I just knew it. There was this presence, I guess, just lurking. It was a vague silhouette in the distance, and the odd collection of shadows that didn't quite fit the scene. I couldn't tell whether it was just a figment of my imagination or something more sinister. The world started to spin again. Love Shack rushed into my ears from someone blasting it with astonishing velocity, and my friends carried on cheering, as though nothing had happened. But I just couldn't shake off that feeling from those few creepy moments. Like we weren't alone, that something else was there with us, unseen, but undeniably present, watching. That was the first half of the strangest night in my life. A night that was supposed to be about basketball, about camaraderie and university spirit, but it would turn out to be something else entirely. Right then, while everyone else was caught up in the event, I just couldn't shake off this weird feeling. It was like being in a dream, except I was totally awake. My gaze was slowly drawn upwards towards the rooftop of one of the buildings. Then I saw it. There was this figure on top of the concrete and glass building, sticking out like a sore thumb. This thing was massive, definitely over 6 feet. It looked kind of human, but all wrong. Its limbs were too long and thin, and it was hunched over. Even from far away, it just gave me the creeps. I was scared, sure, but also kind of amazed. Here I was in the middle of this big event, staring at something like from a sci-fi movie. I watched as its large wings started to spread out to its sides, almost as if it was about to take flight. Its wings weren't feathery but leathery, like a bat's, which looked really weird on its human-like body. It had these 2 red eyes, glowing like embers in the dark, staring right at me. It felt like they were piercing through everything just to see me. Before I could even wrap my head around what I was seeing, the crowd's roar snapped me back to reality. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, half expecting it to be gone, a figment of my overactive imagination. But when I looked again, it was still there, just staring. Overwhelmed, I just backed away from the crowd in that building, away from those creepy red eyes. I barely noticed my friends asking what was wrong. All I could think of was the thing I had witnessed. I don't even remember how I got back to my dorm that night. I just remember being there. Next morning, everything seemed totally normal. The sun was out. Students were grumbling about hangovers and assignments. Seemed like I was the only one who saw that weird creature. I've replayed that night in my mind countless times since then. Was what I saw real? Was it a trick of light or some well-executed prank for the tradition of Midnight Madness? I couldn't let it go, and I started looking into it, digging up all these strange stories and hidden facts. Apparently, the creature I saw that night is known to many as the Mothman, an enormous bat-like creature, often tied to terrifying occurrences and bad omens. Why it chose to reveal itself to me that night, though, is a mystery to me until today. Despite the fear and confusion, I actually wouldn't change a thing. That surreal encounter, with something most people only dare to whisper about, has made me curious. It's unlocked a curiosity to know more. Most of all, I've learned that we're just tiny parts of this huge, mysterious universe. There's so much out there that we don't know, can't possibly understand. But isn't that what university is all about? Challenging what we know and finding the unknown, finding ourselves. And who knows, maybe this year, another freshman will look up at the right moment during Midnight Madness and see something utterly extraordinary amidst the ordinary.